I would like to give you a new understanding of the brain's ability to recover its functional potential after a brain injury. In 1978, two things happened to me. In May, my husband died, and in September, I gave birth to a son, Doran. Doran was jaundiced shortly after his birth. This led to a diagnosis of severe brain damage, leading to acetoid cerebral palsy and profound hearing loss. Doran was expected to develop writhing movements and to be incapable of sitting up or speech. 3 months later, he was diagnosed with kidney failure and was placed on dialysis at Guy's Hospital for a further month. I was told repeatedly that brain injury was chronic and irreversible, and that I should sedate my son to reduce muscle spasm and to get on with my life. I did not do what I was told. At Doran's first hospital visit, I could see from the other children in the ward that there were many routes to brain injury, both before and after birth. There were also many challenging neurological conditions that were not classed as brain injuries, but as syndromes, although the children's symptoms looked very similar, as did the clinical management of these conditions. The word treatment was not considered appropriate. The most important thing we do is breathe. And as Doran's breathing seemed fast, I kept him on my body virtually all the time to calm him. I began to invent therapy for Doran based on common sense. I looked for the most insightful alternative approach. When that began to fail me, I returned again to the breath. Common sense suggested Doran's breathing should not only meet the oxygen needs to stay alive, but, I presumed, the increased oxygen needs normally demanded for the extras of growth and development that might lie dormant in his brain. After an extraordinary 6 years, although uncoordinated, Doran was walking. I had written a best-selling book on his life. He was personable and becoming also something of a celebrity, since he appeared to be achieving something impossible. But I still did not understand enough to help all those other neurologically challenged children to which I had now been introduced. Nor did I know enough to bring Doran from a walking child to a coordinated child who could speak and fully understand speech. To take matters further, I needed to study science at a much higher level and in virtually all departments. Appreciating my dilemma, a friend lent me a TV, advising me to watch a series of programs on brain plasticity, introduced by Professor Patrick Wall. Professor Wall was the very eminent and highly regarded head of Cerebral Studies Department at University College, London. What I learned seemed to contradict Doran's doctors. There appeared to be overwhelming evidence that mammals can grow new brain cells, as well as the connections between them, called synapses, and that this had the potential to continue throughout an individual's lifetime. Furthermore, the brain seemed quite capable of reallocating disused brain cells for another purpose. The brains of rats showed dynamic characteristics after brain injury. This occurred once the animals were placed in an enriched environment that promoted exercise and possibly breathing. This could happen even when only a small amount of residual brain tissue in the affected area survived. Moreover, striking parallels appeared between the normally developing brain's ability to organize neural pathways and the injured brain's ability to reorganize itself after injury. If this were true, if all of this were true, why then did developmental problems in children appear so dreadful? Why did they produce so many symptoms? Why did the symptoms of brain injury also appear in children who are not classified as brain injured, but having syndromes or genetic problems? It was accepted wisdom that brain injuries were the effect of events that caused a reduction in oxygen to brain cells. But couldn't syndromes and genetic conditions also reflect lowered circulating oxygen? Perhaps oxygen also acted as a genetic trigger. My mind ached with questions. Was there some connection between breathing quality, exercise ability, and the wide range of neurological challenges that affected development? Summoning up all my courage, I wrote to the professor, explaining that I believed breathing might always be affected by brain injury and developmental problems, and that in children this might be more serious and perhaps the real reason behind the chronic nature of their situation. Professor Wall invited me to meet him at the university, and to my joy and relief, he took me seriously. He explained that he had both the power and the inclination to grant me entry into the university as a qualifier for doctorate research. Thus, in this extraordinary fashion, I found myself placed in the psychology department at UCL. My investigations eventually led me to develop an entirely new methodology to provide for the treatment rather than the management of all neurologically based challenges, one which has increasingly wider implications. It appeared most, if not all, neurological challenges affected movement, and that the steady acquisition of rhythmical coordinated movement was the central means by which the respiratory system was developed after birth. The development of one respiratory organ now began to appear critical, since at birth the infant's diaphragm, which I now understood to be the body's main respiratory muscle, was also the only respiratory muscle available to the infant until it was 6 months old. Moreover, at birth, this muscle was very flat and small, and far from the grand dome-like shape it must acquire if all was to go well. Or perhaps better to say abnormal exercise quality, thus presented itself to be a major way in which the breathing, or perhaps more specifically, the diaphragm development of that wide range of developmentally challenged children could be affected. Then, by persistent digging into the scientific literature, I discovered something else. Apparently, when there was a drop in oxygen to the fetal brain, there was also a rerouting of blood supply from the fetal lungs and diaphragm to support the fetal brain. Failure to adequately compensate the brain in this way meant the infant would end up with both an injured or abnormal brain and a weaker and less responsive diaphragm. This weakness in the infant's diaphragm could often be hidden in early life, because the respiratory control system would then try to introduce upper chest breathing as a means of compensatory support. And also because, while still small, the infant's oxygen needs were relatively modest, making the discrepancy between oxygen supply and demand less obvious. Now, for the first time, I was beginning to take more interest in the diaphragm, and in order to find out what effect this situation might have on development, the obvious thing to do was to find out more about it. The story really takes off from here. You see, I identified the diaphragm, an organ to which most people have never given a second thought, plays a breathtaking number of multifunctional roles. Before looking at these roles, it is of some interest to point out here something of which many of you will be only too aware. Neurological challenges are not only cognitive and motor, they include a long list of unexplained complaints, including problems with blood circulation, posture, flexibility and stability, abnormal body structure, head control, reaction time, and speech, sleep pattern, digestion, constipation, acid reflux, chewing and swallowing, and incontinence, as well as problems with body temperature, emotion, vision, brain growth, inflexible thinking, general health and immunity, and in many cases, epilepsy. Could the respiratory diaphragm be involved in all this? The short answer was yes, it could and was. In health and disease, the diaphragm's movements affect everything we do. When you breathe in, the dome of your diaphragm descends gently, displacing your internal organs. Since your lungs are attached to it, they expand downwards, allowing more space for air to be taken into them. When you breathe out, your diaphragm rises so that the air is expelled once more. In fact, Because of their attachments to your diaphragm, all your internal organs, including your heart, are moved gently downwards and upwards when you breathe. However, this act, vital to life, is only the beginning of the diaphragm's roles, which include the development and functional integration of all your physical systems. I will cover a few important examples. Most notably, your diaphragm provides and maintains the healthy equilibrium between available oxygen supplies and the oxygen needs of your body on a moment-to-moment basis. Its pressures circulate the fluids within you to drive stagnation from your body. It returns the deoxygenated blood from your veins back to your heart and affects your heart rate. It is the central, most important postural muscle on which all your other postural muscles depend. It lowers you gently into sleep and provides oxygen energy to promote dream sleep when most of your brain growth takes place. It influences your blood pressure, including the blood pressure in your brain and the flow of cerebral spinal fluid and lymph. Moreover, it is connected to your lungs and heart and all your internal organs from your pelvic floor to the floor of your mouth by superconductive ligaments called fascia, which act like fiber optic cables relaying information. In fact, your diaphragm needs to be so responsive, it is made up entirely by fascia. It changes and balances your respiratory rate and depth to meet your body's ever-varying oxygen needs. Reflect, your body is mainly water, 70% water in a child. Water carries electromagnetic information, and your diaphragm is constantly moving these internal waters with every breath you take, so keeping every cell within you electrically, magnetically connected. From your birth, the internal pressures from each of your many breaths develops and maintains your body shape from within, thus creating the shape of your rib cage, the spring-like curves of your spine, the opening of your shoulders and pelvis, and stabilizing of your head and neck. In fact, your whole body shape reflects the status of your diaphragm. Moreover, your long, strong psoas muscles attach your diaphragm to your pelvic floor and hips, and your scalene muscles attach your arms to your rib cage, to which your diaphragm is also attached. This explains why, when you move your limbs, you create blood circulation through your diaphragm. Thus, the early rhythmical movements of the infant are vital for diaphragm development and the connection between movement, breathing, and oxygen consumption. Now you may begin to see why abnormal movement affects breathing and diaphragm development, and therefore the overall development of the neurologically challenged child. At this point in my research, it was becoming clear to me that I had uncovered the reason for the different views on developmental challenges held between neurobiologists like Professor Wall and the doctors and physios working in pediatric neurology. The rats whose brains were damaged in the lab by the good professor and his associates already had mature diaphragms, as had adult stroke patients. Therefore, they still had some of the respiratory circulatory foundation to meet the circulating oxygen needs of the levels of exercise required for the restorative process to kick in. However, I noted that both rats and stroke patients still needed to be able to exercise without undue stress if recovery was to be possible. You see, stress is when oxygen supply cannot meet demand. And when this happens, available circulating oxygen fails to be delivered at the weakest point, which is where the blood vessels are damaged or restricted in some way. When brain-injured rats are stressed, their brain lesions get worse. The constant oxygen-demanding movement of children who are autistic or hyperactive is disconnected from their upper chest emotional breathing. This creates low-level metabolic stress, which is counterproductive to the reconstruction process needed for healing. The same is true for children who are uncoordinated and have movement problems since it is more oxygen consuming to limp rather than to walk normally. A weaker diaphragm plus a neurological challenge is therefore a recipe for a chronic condition. So, it became increasingly clear that the success of all I had done previously for my son could be related to improvements I had created in his diaphragm. But this approach had been time-consuming and involved continuous movement. Moreover, it had not gone far enough. I had to find a way to focus only on the diaphragm without involving other muscles. Fortunately, nature already provided me with the answers. I gradually discovered that from 2 months post-conception, signals from the fetal brain's respiratory center, caused the flat, immature diaphragm to exercise an activity called fetal breathing. These tiny pressures enhance diaphragm blood flow, improving its strength and nervous capacity. Furthermore, because the fetal lungs are attached to the diaphragm, every little breathing movement causes lung cells to stretch. This cell stretching pumps more blood and circulating oxygen into the lung cells and is a signal for the release of genetic material, allowing the lung cells to create lung structures which are appropriate to their development. Fetal breathing also increases blood supply to the nerves and ligaments of the diaphragm, causing it to become stronger and more responsive to the many demands placed upon it. So the light, gentle pressures from fetal breathing are vital for respiratory organ growth. After birth, the infant's tiny rhythmical movements help to increasingly drive blood flow through the diaphragm, enhancing its capacity to meet the steadily increasing needs of its ongoing development. There was also evidence that the light but powerful pressures of breathing gently spin the fluid of the blood through the blood vessels, enhancing their growth and so the nourishment of the body tissues. Encouraging the growth of blood vessels is essential to bring more oxygen to the brain, the nervous system, the ligaments, muscles, and connective tissues, and supply all the many complex oxygen needs of the body's physical systems. Thus, by learning from nature, I developed very specific, very light pressures, which were applied to the children onto the rib cage over the diaphragm. This unique approach came to be known as the Scotson technique, or TST. Once developed, I tested the pressures by recording the patterns of the children's diaphragmatic and upper chest breathing onto a computer screen using a device called respiratory inductive plethysmography. This device showed that children with many dysfunctional neurological challenges, from cerebral palsy to autism, and including all those with syndromes and genetic conditions that are increasingly being diagnosed, had abnormal breathing. Statistical results from my studies using this data also showed that the application of the pressures brought both a significant immediate change in breathing pattern together with a stronger long-term improvement. These results could be linked to positive developmental changes observed by both the children's parents and their physicians. Let us look at some pre- and post-therapy slides. Note that positive change in posture was also linked to positive changes in respiratory pattern and to observable developmental changes recorded by both parents and their children's physicians. The pre- and post-therapy studies included in my thesis showed that children from infancy to teenage with mild to severe challenges all made significant progress that contradicted the poor expectations of their doctors. Their progress applied to body structure, posture, head control, movement, mobility, understanding and behavior, sleep quality, digestion and elimination, chewing and swallowing, communication and speech, emotionality and behavior, understanding and the ability to follow instructions. Since there is a strong link between breathing pattern and seizure activity, it was also not surprising that the children's seizures reduced and in some cases ceased altogether. In 2002, I founded Advance, a charitable therapy center, which I have been fortunate enough to run with my daughter Lily. We have had families visit us from all over the world and have seen the consistency of the results of the therapy, a consistency which is also recorded in my PhD thesis, now available on Amazon Books. The evidence suggests that viewing the multifunctional diaphragm as the central driver of all developmental processes and treating it as a priority when developmental challenges occur should be recognized as the single greatest insight into a child's, and indeed an adult's, potential for recovery from developmental challenges of all descriptions. In summary, the restorative process relies on taking the way back to the foundations created during infancy. This, in itself, is the beginning and foundation of the way forward. It all begins with the breath, and most centrally, the appreciation of the multifunctional role of the respiratory diaphragm, that most extraordinary and magical organ, to which I hope I have now awakened your attention, and so placed in your mind a different, more optimistic view of a developmentally challenged child's expectations in life. Families often ask me, is there anything else they can do? My reply is, anything that can support the metabolic oxygen needs of development is potentially good. The balance between oxygen demand and oxygen supply is key to healthy development. Babies self-regulate for pleasure. They exercise, then they enjoy rest, and then when refreshed, they begin again. As a rule, they do not overstretch themselves, and if they do, they need recovery time. Whatever you do, do not overload a child with diverse oxygen demands that cannot be comfortably met. Rest from sensory motor activity is a vital part of an infant's daily life, since the oxygen requirements needed for the building of the infant's internal structures also need to be met. Because of the presence of abnormal breathing patterns and all its attendant problems, a developmentally challenged child is going to be more vulnerable to respiratory circulatory compromise. To help reduce this issue of oxygen starvation, I studied the use of hyperbaric oxygen and began to pioneer the approach globally for children with cerebral palsy, autism, and other neurological challenges. I have nearly 30 years' experience using hyperbaric oxygen therapy to teach both children and adults with many diverse challenges. So what does hyperbaric oxygen actually do that is different? There are physical laws that explain why gases dissolve in liquids relative to the prevailing atmospheric pressure. Unlike water, air can be compressed. This is why oxygen from inhaled air dissolves in your bloodstream. This is why you feel more energized on a high-pressure day than on a low-pressure day, and why you feel healthier at the seaside. By the sea, your body tissues are more richly oxygenated because the ground is lower and there is more atmospheric pressure above you. And why divers' wounds heal more quickly, and why, when you open a bottle of fizzy drink, so releasing the pressure, bubbles suddenly appear. However, at normal atmospheric pressure, only 2.5% of oxygen is dissolved in your blood plasma. The rest is carried in the hemoglobin of your red blood cells, which admits only about 3% increase when oxygen is breathed at normal pressure at 1 atmosphere. But increasing the pressure by using a hyperbaric chamber dissolves more oxygen into your plasma and other body fluids. Plasma, being liquid, can pass through damaged or underdeveloped blood vessels that have become almost too narrow for the red blood cells to squeeze through, creating a chronic state of reduced oxygenation. Oxygen is a healer and a cleanser and helps the uptake of other nutrients. Thus, the more oxygen in the blood plasma, the more healing can take place. Studies show it heals inflammation, sweeping away toxicity and increasing cellular energy by stimulating mitochondrial function. Furthermore, it helps the absorption of food supplements and supports the nutrition taken by the child. During hyperbaric therapy at our clinic, child and parents sit comfortably together in a hyperbaric chamber designed to look like Thomas the Tank Engine. There is a bonus point here that the oxygen also benefits the parent. Although hyperbaric oxygen is one of the most studied protocols in existence and very safe, I have learned from long experience, one protocol does not fit all. For some children, lower pressures and or short sessions work better, since hyperbaric therapy promotes the removal of toxins, and too much too soon can be less pleasant. However, after an initial visit of a half-hour session, it is most likely the following sessions will be for an hour. There's a large porthole in the Thomas the Tank Chamber, and books and toys, but not phones or iPads, are allowed in to make the therapy more altogether enjoyable. From the first session, adult and child have a feel-good sensation. They are often at first energized, and then as evening approaches, report being very relaxed and often sleepy. Parents generally report small, early positive changes, increasing gradually but noticeably as the increase in oxygen does its deep work in your body. Many improvements are reported, including in limb relaxation, speech, mood, sleep, behavior, general well-being, and seizure reduction. It is my long experience, backed up by hundreds of research papers, that indicates hyperbaric oxygen has much to offer for those seeking a return to health and capacity. Thank you all for coming so far. It's quite a journey, and I hope now you will be a little more awake, that you have more power than you believed to change things. Our centre in the UK is open to all, and we would welcome you, and if anybody wants to contact me, I would be only too happy to answer any initial questions. But it would be very useful for you to go to our website, lindascotson.com, www.lindascotson.com, where you will find a lot of very useful material. And there's a film there, and the history, under the history bar at the top. It's called Breathe. It's also available on YouTube. You probably have to put Breathe and my name in. But this gives the history of my history, the history of the centre, and of course, Doran's history. So you will learn a lot about the background and the human side of things, because it is a very human side of things. I've had to discuss the science because I really want you to understand it. It also shows Doran running. Doran now runs half marathons. He's a painter. He does many, many things that would be adventurous for any young man. And so he has already come through this strange barrier that has been set up by the establishment, and which I hope now you can see can fall very, very easily before your eyes. So thank you all so much for listening, and I would be delighted to meet any one of you, either in person or by Skype or Zoom in the near future. Thank you again.